From the abstract expressionism of postwar America, a second generation of abstract artists emerged, using innovative techniques in a less subjective style and avoiding painterly gesture. Often on a huge scale, their work was absolutely non-representational and characterized by clarity of composition and color. For artists working in America in the early 1950s, abstract expressionism was the dominant influence, yet some were already looking for new ways of interpreting abstract painting. Experimenting with highly diluted oil and acrylic paint, they developed a distinctive and purely abstract style. Origins and influences. Helen Frankenthaler was a pioneer of this new abstraction, influenced by the techniques of Jackson Pollock's action painting and the large blocks of color and work by Mark Rothko and Robert Motherwell. Her soak stain technique eliminated brush strokes and surface texture, placing more emphasis on the form and shapes of fields of color, and was soon taken up by other artists looking for an alternative to abstract expressionism. Style and technique. Frankenthaler's new soak stain technique was simple, but radical, pouring very diluted oil or acrylic paint directly onto unprimed canvas and allowing it to soak in. The idea was similar to Pollock's action painting, but the results completely different: large areas of flat, translucent color, bonded into, rather than applied onto, the canvas. Other artists took up the technique of this color field painting, and the purity of its abstraction led to an interest in simple geometric shapes and bold colors in the work of Ellsworth Kelly and Kenneth Noland, for example, which in turn inspired a similar movement in abstract sculpture. In Britain, the leading interpreters of the movement that became known as post-painterly abstraction were the new generation sculptors who exhibited at London's Whitechapel Gallery, above, in 1965. In the US, the movement was primarily concerned with painting, abstract painting and sculpture. Timeline. In the early 1950s, Helen Frankenthaler's new soak stain techniques were adopted by artists such as Morris Louis and Jules Olitsky. The pure abstraction of this color field school evolved into the hard-edge abstracts of Kenneth Noland and Ellsworth Kelly, which inspired many British sculptors in the 1960s, and were taken a stage further in the shaped canvases of Al Held and Frank Stella. 1957, Frankenthaler, Lorelei. 1958, Kelly, Broadway. 1959, Noland, Half. 1966, Tucker, Thebes. 1986, Stella, Krish, Crocky, Manico, Duncino. Interpretations. The techniques developed by American abstract painters in the 1950s resulted in a wide variety of interpretations, from color field paintings through hard-edged geometric compositions to complex mixed-media work, but they had one thing in common: the avoidance of painterly gesture. Painting. Helen Frankenthaler exhibited the first major painting using soak stain technique, Mountains and Sea, in 1952. This not only launched her career, but also provoked a reaction to abstract expressionism with its unemotional style and gentle colors. As other painters experimented with her techniques, different styles began to evolve in the early 1960s, and the critic Clement Greenberg coined the term post-painterly abstraction for an exhibition in Los Angeles in 1964 as a general description of the interpretations of the style. Among the artists included were Jules Olitsky and Ellsworth Kelly, who simplified composition, often taking the principles of color field painting to extremes with canvases of a single color. Morris Louis and Kenneth Noland, leading members of the so-called Washington Color School, explored geometric shapes and bolder colors, in various series of stripes, circles, chevrons and so on, which developed into the hard edge style, and Frank Stella and Al Held worked on irregularly shaped canvases and introduced three-dimensional elements, while retaining the dispassionate style. Sculpture. Post-painterly abstraction was initially an American movement, and as the name suggests, concerned almost exclusively with painting. Its influence, however, soon spread elsewhere, most importantly to Britain, and manifested itself in a school of abstract sculpture. Anthony Caro and his students at St. Martin's School of Art in London began using industrial materials such as sheet metal and plastic to create abstract forms, painting them in flat, bold primary colors. In the US, meanwhile, Painters including Ellsworth Kelly and Frank Stella were branching out from the purely color-field style, and as well as producing mixed-media two-dimensional work began to adapt their styles to sculpture. Like their paintings, these sculptures were often on a massive scale, requiring industrial equipment to cut and assemble. Twin Peaks Anthony Caro British artists, particularly sculptors, were also inspired by the clarity of American post-painterly abstraction. Among them was the influential teacher Anthony Caro, whose students in the new generation further developed the style abstract sculpture during the 1960s. 1977-78, bronze, 96.5 by 48.3 by 41.9 centimeters, private collection. A Spawn Morris Lewis color field painting, using the new acrylic paints and innovative techniques for applying it to the canvas, arose in the U.S. in the 1950s. Its purity of color and form was in distinct contrast to the abstract expressionism that preceded it. Acrylic on canvas, private collection. Helen Frankenthaler. B. New York, 1928. One of the leading figures to emerge from post-war abstract expressionism, Helen Frankenthaler pioneered the technique of color field painting, see page 523, in elegantly simple compositions with luminous colors. Frankenthaler studied at the Dalton School in New York and at Vermont's Bennington College, and then became involved with the New York School of Abstract Painters, which included Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, and her future husband Robert Motherwell. Attracted by Pollock's method of painting on unprimed canvases, Frankenthaler took the technique a step further, allowing thin paint to soak into the raw canvas. Mountains and Sea, which used this soak-stain technique, brought about her breakthrough in 1952, and she has since developed the idea in increasingly abstract and uncomplicated compositions. Lorelei. In the 1950s, Frankenthaler produced a number of huge paintings by her soak-stain technique. Using heavily thinned oil paint allowed the texture of the unprimed canvas to show, and gave an impression similar to a watercolor. 1957, Oil on unprimed canvas, 179 by 220 centimeters, Brooklyn Museum of Art, New York, U.S. The Bay. Adapting her technique to the newly developed acrylic paints, Frankenthaler explored simpler forms in her paintings during the 1960s, juxtaposing large areas of intense, contrasting colors. This huge canvas is divided into only 4 areas of color. 1963, Acrylic on canvas, 205 by 208 centimeters, the Detroit Institute of Arts, Detroit, U.S.